welcome back. I just got a really neat marijuana fact. I'm going to go ahead and read it to you. And it says cannabis extract medicines were produced by Eli Lilly, Park Davis, Tilden's Brothers Smith, Squibb, and many other American and European companies. And during all that time, there was not one reported death from cannabis extract medicines, and virtually no abuse or mental disorders reported, except for first-time or novice users occasionally becoming disoriented or overly introverted. Overly introverted, well, that might be thoughtful or introspective. So from 1842 to 1900, cannabis actually made up half of all medicines sold. And get this, with virtually no fear of its high. So, let's get back to our show. I just thought that was interesting. I thought you would like to hear that. We do have Lieutenant Diane Goldstein here and ready to talk to us now. Diane has been very vocal in her opinion that marijuana prohibition is an unwise fiscal policy that makes our communities less safe. And that is a quote from her. She is a retired lieutenant commander. She served, I believe, 20 years, maybe more, in law enforcement. I do believe all 20 years were with the Redondo Police Department. And as a mom and as a veteran in the field of law enforcement, I am happy she's here to share her experiences and her point of view with us. So let's bring Diane on now.
Diane, are you there?
I am. Pleasure to meet you, or actually pleasure to talk to you, Jen.
Well, thank you so much. I want to thank you for taking your time to join us today. And I also want to wish you a happy Mother's Day.
Thank you very much. A happy Mother's Day back. I think it's important for us as moms to continue to not only raise our children as they're adults, but to help raise other people's children as well.
You know, I think that's so true. It does take a village, doesn't it? Yeah. Well, I'm delighted that you're here with us. And I've given a brief history of your background, but I would love for our listeners to hear it firsthand from you if you'd like to share with us a little bit of your history and particularly what inspired you to take the position you have in the war on drugs.
Sure. I got hired in 1983 as a police officer in Redondo Beach, California. And so I grew up in what we call out here is the South Bay, great kind of beach communities, Torrance, Redondo, Hermosa, Manhattan. And I was hired at 21, so I was pretty young. So my views on the war on drugs really evolved a lot because in 1983 you started seeing the significant expansion of the war on drugs. Obviously Nixon started in the 70s and things kept gearing up and ramping up and changing. So from 1983 to 2004 when I retired I worked gang unit, I ran a gang unit, I worked at what was called our Special Investigations Unit, which was a career criminal joint narcotics type unit. In addition to, I started a school resource officer program for our local school district, which was really the one assignment that out of all of them was my favorite because it got me in the middle of working with kids who were at risk. So I saw all these changes, and by the time I retired from a personal level, is that I just felt, you know what, the war on drugs is not working. But I didn't know what to do about it, and you know, I still had my son to raise at that point. Well, subsequently, during this whole time, is I had an older brother who's now deceased. He passed away 4 or 5 years ago now. He was, starting at the age of 11, started using marijuana and alcohol. And he was always high risk. And what we found as an adult is that he was what's called in the mental health world is he was dual diagnosed. He was bipolar, manic depressive, and so he had long bouts of sobriety, tempered with falling off the wagon, depending on his economic situation. So he was good when he was on his psychotropic medications, and when he lost his job, he started to slip. He ended up getting back into the criminal justice system. He had when he was young, he had a felony arrest for a weapons charge, which he successfully, completed probation, had long years of sobriety after that, and he got back into the system. And I had just retired as a lieutenant, and I remember walking in because my brother was living with my husband and I and my son at that time, and we walked into court, and I went up to the DA, and I introduced myself and said, look, I understand the system. I just retired, lieutenant from law enforcement. This is my brother. He lives with us. We're working on getting him into a sober living environment. And I knew what he was entitled to, Prop 36, which was like a drug diversion program here. And the DA literally looked at me and said, I don't care if you've been in law enforcement. I looked at your brother's record. He has a felony conviction. We're going to send him to state prison for 18 months to 3 years.
Oh, my.
And it was one of those defining moments. It wasn't my complete epiphany, but it was a defining moment where I went, wait a minute. And because my brother was one of those low-level nonviolent drug offenders. He lived with us. He was employed. He was trying to deal with his mental illness by self-medicating, which is the typical cycle. We house more mentally ill people in our prisons sometimes, I think, than we do people who just commit crimes, because it's the last bastion of our mental health system at this point. And so my husband and I went out and hired an attorney for my brother, and we got him into a sober living environment. And, I'd like to say that was the end of a great story, and he's still with us. But as what happens with drug addicts is they slip, they fall, they slip, they fall. And he accidentally overdosed, not on illicit drugs, but on a combination of alcohol and his psychotropic medications that caused a heart attack. And so after his death, I really started questioning a lot of different things. And at about the same time in California, so it would have been a couple years after his death, is we had the Prop 19 campaign, which was the legalized marijuana campaign that almost passed. And I went to a couple debates because I've always been very intrigued. And Judge Jim Gray, who is part of LEAP, was debating a police chief, and I went up and introduced myself. And at that time, Neil Franklin happened to be in California, so I got introduced to LEAP back to the East Coast, who set up a meeting with Neil. We sat down and had the discussion, and I said, you know what, this is my fight now. I do it to honor my brother. I do it to ensure that, my son who's in college and his friends don't suffer the consequence of, smoking pot or needlessly. So we were talking about the great group of moms who have united themselves literally from across the United States, who really are trying to help in prohibition, just as moms did who ended alcohol prohibition when they saw the devastating effect that starting prohibition had. Is moms right now are uniting across all of the United States to help end the drug war. And it's a fabulous group, and it's got some tremendous synergy, and it's got, people who have lost kids, who've lost siblings and brothers and sisters, and it's got people who've never lost anyone but believe on what we're doing is wrong, and it's so everyone's got a great story, and we're really starting to make some traction. They write a lot of articles, do a lot of press releases, they educate people, they do lobbying. with legislators to show the impact on the communities. And I think that's what's missing. Law enforcement and our politicians don't have an understanding of what the impact is at the lowest level. They just have this ideology in mind, and they ignore everything else.
Right, and I think you were right on target when you said that so many people are on automatic pilot with, the whole war on drugs. That's the way it is. We've become very accepting of this is the way we handle drug addiction or drug use, because not all use is addiction. Some of it is very legitimately medicating themselves.
Sure, and
and recreational as well. I'm sorry to interrupt. When you really look at it, it's proven that cannabis is less, I would say, effective than alcohol. It doesn't impair you as much.
It's not as dangerous.
Seems to be a safer option. So that's my opinion. But yeah, I think we really need to look at it with very honest eyes at this point.
And I think that's the problem, is people don't understand the rhetorical history involved in the war on drugs. And I think that's one of the things that has really bothered me about law enforcement. And, in California, we've always considered California law enforcement to be heads and tails above anyone else in the rest of the country because we were always so professional. We never, were involved in scandals of corruption. I mean, we had this view of ourselves. And what people don't understand is how corrupting the drug war was.